The conference room buzzed with quiet authority. Rows of polished uniforms filled the seats, stars and stripes glittering beneath the sterile lights. At the head of the table, General Michael Donovan leaned back in his chair, arms folded, expression carved from granite. Around him sat commanders and strategists who had spent decades shaping the Air Force's proud legacy. These were men who believed they had seen everything, and they carried themselves with the certainty of experience. Into this arena of tradition walked Captain Sophia Carter. She stood tall, auburn hair pulled neatly into regulation style, green eyes clear and steady. Every detail of her posture showed discipline, yet there was fire beneath the calm surface. She had come here with a request most considered absurd: assignment to aid B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. The reaction was immediate. A ripple of chuckles ran through the room. Some generals exchanged amused glances, others smirked openly. Donovan's lips curled into something between disbelief and irritation. "Captain Carter," he said, his voice deep and slow, "you've barely scratched the surface of fighter operations. You think you're ready for the most advanced aircraft in the world?" Sophia didn't flinch. Her voice carried evenly across the table. "Yes, sir. I believe I am." The laughter grew sharper, heavier this time. One colonel leaned over to whisper something to his neighbor, and both stifled grins. To them, Sophia was overconfident, reckless, a young pilot daring to step where only seasoned veterans belonged. What none of them knew was that the foundation of Sophia's confidence had been laid long before she ever wore a uniform. It began in the quiet deserts of Nevada, under skies so wide and endless they seemed to swallow time itself. Sophia's earliest memories were not of toys or cartoons, but of the rumble of engines. Her grandfather, Colonel Robert Hayes, had been one of the Air Force's most decorated bomber pilots during the Cold War. To Sophia, he was larger than life, a man whose weathered hands once guided steel giants across hostile skies, whose sharp eyes had scanned horizons few dared to cross. On weekends, when other children played ball or chased shadows in the street, Sophia would sit beside him in his hangar. The smell of oil and fuel clung to everything, mixing with desert dust. Colonel Hayes kept an old Cessna 172 there, a modest civilian aircraft he had modified with advanced navigation systems. "Flying," he would say, placing her small hands on the yoke, "isn't just about pointing an aircraft from one place to another. It's about thinking 3 steps ahead in every direction, up, down, across the horizon. In combat, 1 second of hesitation changes history." His stories painted vivid images in her young mind. Missions that lasted 20 hours without pause. Navigating by stars when electronics failed. Steering bombers through storms that grounded lesser planes. He told her about flying B-52 stratofortresses across oceans, carrying weapons powerful enough to alter wars, and the crushing responsibility that came with such firepower. "Little aviator," he often whispered. "Anyone can fly straight and level. But a true pilot knows that sometimes a single mission shifts the fate of nations. And when that moment comes, you can't rely on fear or luck. You rely on preparation, clarity, and courage." Those weekends shaped Sophia in ways she could not yet understand. By the time she was a teenager, she had logged more hours in the cockpit of that Cessna than many adults achieved in formal training. Her grandfather didn't just teach her mechanics, he tested her mind. He'd cut the instruments mid-flight and tell her to find her way home by the sun and stars. He'd force her to recite calculations while she adjusted altitude, speed, and direction all at once. At first, she panicked. Tears blurred her vision as the compass went dark. But Hayes never raised his voice. He would sit silently, letting her wrestle with fear until something inside her clicked. Slowly, she learned to trust her instincts, to think under pressure, to strip away panic and focus on solutions. By 16, she could land a plane smoothly even in crosswinds that rattled veteran pilots. By 18, she understood that flight was not simply skill but discipline, a mental chess game played against weather, machinery, and sometimes fate itself. Back in the briefing room years later, standing before men who doubted her, Sophia carried all those lessons like armor. The generals only saw a young captain, but inside her lived every word her grandfather had drilled into her. Clarity over fear, courage over hesitation. She met General Donovan's stare. For a moment, silence stretched thin between them, broken only by the faint hum of the projector at the back of the room. She remembered her grandfather's voice. A true pilot understands that sometimes the world changes in a single mission. "Sir," she said steadily, "I'm not asking because I think it will be easy. I'm asking because when the time comes, I will not hesitate." The room went quiet. The laughter had faded, replaced by a tension none wanted to acknowledge. For the first time, a few officers shifted uneasily, as though realizing this captain's confidence was not arrogance, but something forged long ago in skies they could not imagine. Sophia Carter had not yet flown the B-2, but she already understood the weight of its wings. The desert sun blazed over Nevada when Sophia Carter left home for the last time as a civilian. She carried little more than a duffel bag, her grandfather's watch, and a restless fire in her chest. At 22, armed with an aerospace engineering degree from the University of Nevada, she had chosen the one path that felt inevitable: the United States Air Force. From the first day of training, Sophia knew she was different. While others marveled at the complexity of engines and systems, she saw patterns, interlocking principles of physics and design that explained how machines breathed life into the sky. To her, an aircraft was more than steel and fuel. It was a puzzle of energy, balance, and rhythm. She didn't memorize manuals the way her classmates did. Instead, she broke systems down, diagramming every equation in her mind until she could almost feel the flow of air across the wings. Instructors noticed quickly. During simulation drills, when her peers panicked at flashing alarms, Sophia calmly rerouted systems. When crosswinds tested the group's landing ability, she adjusted trim and power with fluid confidence. Some called it talent, others whispered luck, but Sophia knew it was neither. It was the result of every impossible exercise her grandfather had forced on her in that old Cessna. The nights she cried when instruments failed, the mornings she wiped her tears and tried again. By the end of her initial training, she ranked at the top of her class. But numbers alone couldn't capture what set her apart. Sophia didn't just fly. She thought like the aircraft itself, anticipating weaknesses, exploiting strengths, adapting to situations before they unfolded. Her first assignment was to the F-16 Fighting Falcon, a sleek machine built for speed and agility. For 3 years, Sophia lived inside that cockpit, soaring through deserts, jungles, and skies fractured by conflict. The F-16 was demanding, a restless predator that punished hesitation. Many pilots struggled to master its sharp turns and delicate balance. Sophia, however, thrived. She flew with instinct, moving through clouds as though they opened just for her. In combat drills, her precision was surgical. During bombing exercises, her scores were flawless. Every strike aligned with mathematical perfection. More than once, instructors replayed her footage to highlight her timing and situational awareness. But no moment defined her reputation more than her second deployment to Syria. The airspace was thick with threats, surface-to-air missiles, hostile fighters, endless ground fire. Missions carried razor-thin margins between success and disaster. During one operation, Sophia led a strike team tasked with dismantling fortified enemy positions. She flew low, threading between radar networks, her jet vanishing into the folds of terrain. Then, like a ghost, she appeared above the target, released her payload, and disappeared before enemy sensors could lock on. The attack was so swift, so precise, that enemy forces reported nothing. No incoming signal, no trace on radar, just fire blooming from the ground, buildings collapsing into dust. Her squadmates, half in awe and half in disbelief, gave her a name that followed her forever: Phantom. The call sign was more than a title, it was a promise. Phantom became known for missions where survival seemed unlikely, where chaos reigned and hope was thin. Time and again, Sophia returned with her aircraft untouched, her objectives complete. By her 3rd year, she had flown 247 combat missions. She had mastered close air support, precision strikes, and complex navigation that left seasoned pilots shaking their heads. Quietly, other squadrons studied her techniques, integrating her unorthodox methods into training manuals. And yet, despite her record, Whispers lingered. She was young. She was a woman in a world still shaped by older rules. While her peers received nods of approval and quiet promises of advancement, Sophia often heard the same refrain. Not yet, not enough experience. The resistance only sharpened her resolve. She trained harder, studied longer, tested herself against every limit the F-16 offered. If someone doubted her ability to endure 12 hours in a cockpit, she stayed up 14. If they said her reflexes would falter under pressure, she practiced until muscle memory became second nature. Sophia's growing reputation eventually reached the desk of General Michael Donovan, commander of the 509th Bomb Wing. Donovan was a relic of another era, a man who valued tradition, experience, and the proven reliability of time-tested aviators. He respected Sophia's skills, but only within the narrow boundaries he had drawn in his mind. To him, the B-2 Spirit bomber was sacred, a machine reserved for veterans with decades of service. Sophia knew of Donovan's stance. She heard it in the dismissive comments from senior officers, in the way assignments always drifted toward older, male pilots. But she also knew something they didn't. Her path was not meant to be ordinary. Every step, from the Cessna to the F-16, had prepared her for challenges that tradition alone could not overcome. When she looked at the B-2 Spirit, the shadowy stealth bomber with wings that spanned like a predator across the sky, she didn't just see an aircraft. She saw a destiny, the final test her grandfather had trained her for. One evening, while stationed overseas, Sophia sat alone on the wing of her jet, the desert cooling beneath the fading sun. She remembered her grandfather's words, "Sometimes a single mission shifts the fate of nations." Her call sign glowed faintly on the fuselage beside her, Phantom. She touched the letters, tracing their sharp edges. It was no longer just a name. It was her identity, her reminder that she belonged not to doubt but to the skies. She didn't know when the opportunity would come, but she knew one truth with absolute clarity. When the moment arrived, when the impossible mission appeared, she would be ready. And somewhere, in a conference room far away, men like General Donovan were still laughing, unaware that the pilot they dismissed would soon carry the weight of history on her wings. The war room smelled faintly of coffee and tension. Maps stretched across the digital table, glowing with red symbols that marked enemy installations. 12 bases, 12 heavily fortified strongholds spread across a region where stability hung by a thread. Each base controlled something vital: shipping routes, communications, or resources. Together, they formed a wall of power that threatened to choke entire nations. General Michael Donovan stood at the head of the table, his voice steady and commanding. Decades of service lent weight to his every word. "Gentlemen, intelligence confirms the enemy has created a coordinated network. Each installation supports the others. Strike one, and the rest respond. Conventional assault would cost lives we cannot afford." He tapped the screen. Symbols blinked. The only option is a precision strike, one bomber, one mission, eliminating all 12 in a single sweep. The officers around him nodded gravely. The room hummed with calculations, risks, and the silent knowledge that failure meant disaster. Donovan's gaze settled on Colonel John Ramirez, a seasoned bomber pilot, with lines etched deep from years of long flights and endless missions. "Colonel Ramirez has the most experience with the B-2 Spirit," Donovan announced. "He will lead this operation." The decision seemed final. Ramirez inclined his head, neither eager nor reluctant, simply steady. To him, missions were duty, nothing more. At the far end of the table, Captain Sophia Carter sat quietly, her green eyes fixed on the maps. She had been invited as part of the tactical planning team, but it was clear to everyone that her role was minor: observe, contribute where asked, and remain silent when senior voices filled the air. Yet as she studied the enemy network, a realization spread through her mind like lightning. Ramirez's approach, bound by doctrine, would fail. She straightened, heart pounding. "Sir," she said, her voice firm but respectful, "with all due respect, conventional B-2 tactics won't penetrate these defenses. The bases were designed specifically to counter our doctrine. If we follow established routes, we'll lose the aircraft before half the targets are destroyed." The room went still. Heads turned. A captain challenging a general's plan was rare, but a young woman challenging it in front of the entire command staff was almost unthinkable. Donovan's eyes narrowed. Captain Carter, you're out of line. This is not an F-16 sortie. This is strategic bombing. It requires experience, not theory. Sophia inhaled slowly. She could feel the weight of the room pressing against her, the silent disapproval, the certainty that she had overstepped. But she remembered her grandfather's words. A true pilot does not stay silent when the mission demands courage. She stood and activated the display. Flight paths traced across the map in blue, weaving around defense grids in ways no one had considered. Sir, I've run simulations. Using adaptive navigation and dynamic target sequencing, a single bomber can neutralize the network before their defenses synchronize. It requires innovation, not repetition. My engineering background gives me insights into stealth optimization that conventional training doesn't cover. Ramirez frowned, folding his arms. These maneuvers are untested in real combat. A mistake could expose the aircraft. Respectfully, Colonel, Sophia countered. Untested doesn't mean impossible. The bases were built to stop what they expect. If we give them what they don't expect, we win. A murmur swept the room. Some officers looked skeptical, others intrigued. Donovan, however, remained stone-faced. Captain, he said at last, do you understand what you're suggesting? If you fail, 12 enemy bases remain operational. Thousands of lives will be at risk. And if we lose a B-2 spirit, the political consequences alone could fracture alliances. Experience is the shield against such risks, and you don't have it. Sophia met his gaze without wavering. Sir, experience is valuable, but innovation saves missions when experience alone is not enough. The enemy studied our playbook. I'm suggesting we write a new one. Before Donovan could respond, the intelligence officer at the edge of the room interrupted. His voice trembled with urgency. Sir, enemy forces are accelerating defensive preparations. Our window for success is shrinking. If we delay, the mission becomes impossible. Donovan's jaw tightened. Time pressed against him like a vice. On one hand, he had Ramirez, steady, reliable, proven. On the other, Carter, young, untested, but offering a plan that fit the impossible nature of the task. Tradition against innovation. Certainty against risk. The silence stretched. Every officer in the room held their breath, waiting. Finally, Donovan spoke, his voice low and sharp. Captain Carter, if you fail, history will remember this as the day arrogance cost us everything. But if you succeed, he stopped, eyes flicking to the map. If you succeed, you'll redefine what's possible in our field. Sophia nodded once. Sir, I understand the stakes. I'm ready. The order was given. Preparations began. As the officers filed out, some muttered doubts under their breath. Others watched her with quiet curiosity. Ramirez placed a hand on her shoulder, not unkindly. Carter, the sky has no patience for pride. Be certain you know what you're doing. She looked at him, her voice calm. Colonel, I've been preparing for this my whole life. That night, as she walked across the hangar floor toward the waiting B-2 Spirit, the enormity of the mission pressed upon her. The aircraft loomed in the shadows like a silent predator, its dark wings stretching wider than imagination. She paused, hand brushing the cold surface of its skin, feeling the weight of both doubt and destiny. Somewhere deep inside, her grandfather's words echoed again. Sometimes one mission shifts the fate of nations. For Sophia Carter, that mission had finally arrived. The hangar was quiet, save for the metallic echoes of tools clattering and the distant hum of generators. Towering in the dim light stood the B-2 Spirit, a machine of shadow and silence. Its sleek, bat-like wings stretched across the floor like a predator at rest, absorbing every glare of the fluorescent lights above. To most, it was a marvel of engineering. To Sophia Carter, it felt like destiny forged from steel. She approached slowly, helmet tucked beneath her arm, boots clicking against the polished concrete. For a brief moment, she ran her fingers along the bomber's skin, feeling the cold, smooth surface. This wasn't just an aircraft, it was the sharp edge of history, and tonight she would wield it. Captain Carter, The crew chief called out, his voice tinged with both respect and worry. Systems are green across the board. Spirit of Washington is ready for departure. She gave a curt nod. Thank you. I'll take it from here. Inside the cockpit, the silence was thicker. Lights blinked softly across panels, each one a heartbeat waiting for her command. She strapped in, hands steady as she moved through checklists. Her breathing slowed, syncing with the rhythm of switches and dials. Control, this is Spirit 1, she said over comms, her voice calm, precise. Pre-flight complete. Requesting clearance. Spirit 1, Control. You are cleared for departure. Execute Operation Phantom Strike. Godspeed. The engines roared to life, deep and resonant, a growl that seemed to vibrate through her bones. The bomber rolled forward, gathering speed. With a surge, it lifted into the night, vanishing into darkness as though the sky itself had swallowed it whole. The first phase of the mission was the most dangerous, penetration. Enemy radar swept the skies in endless arcs, searching for intruders. But Sophia danced between them, weaving a path through terrain and silence. She remembered her grandfather's lessons about thinking in 3 dimensions. To the enemy, the sky was a grid. To her, it was a canvas. She used terrain masking, dipping low behind ridges, climbing just enough to slip past radar zones. Her instruments glowed, but her instincts were sharper. Every adjustment was a calculation, every breath a measured beat in a symphony of stealth. The first target appeared on her display, a command and control facility buried in the desert. It was the brain of the network, the hub that linked the 12 bases into one cohesive beast. Eliminate it, and the rest would stumble in confusion. She lined up the strike, her hand steady on the controls. The crosshairs locked. A single press, and the bomb detached, vanishing into the night. Seconds stretched like hours. Then, a bloom of fire erupted on the ground. The facility crumbled into ash before alarms could sound. 1 down, she whispered. 11 to go. Targets 2 and 3 followed swiftly. Fuel depots hidden beneath camouflage netting. Underground storage bristling with weapons. All destroyed before a single defense system stirred. Her movements were sharp, fluid, like a dancer shifting through shadows. But the silence did not last. By the 4th strike, the enemy realized they were under attack. Radar beams grew frantic. Air defense systems roared to life. Missiles launched blindly into the night, slicing through the air where they thought she might be. Sophia remained invisible. She shifted her course unpredictably, never flying the same pattern twice. Enemy operators cursed in confusion as their screens flickered with ghosts. They chased phantoms, and none of them knew that the real phantom was already setting her sights on the next target. As the mission wore on, the strain grew heavier. Hours stretched into a blur. Her muscles ached, eyes stung, but her mind remained locked in sharp focus. Each target demanded new tactics. She altered altitude, changed weapon release angles, even manipulated timing to trick enemy radar into miscalculations. Targets 4 through 8 fell in succession. Communication centers erupted into flames. Hangars collapsed under the weight of precision bombs. Air defense nodes burned until nothing remained but smoldering craters. But with each strike, the enemy's response grew fiercer. Their network was unraveling, but desperation made them dangerous. Fighters scrambled into the skies. Missiles painted the darkness with streaks of fire. One missile locked on, screaming toward her position. Sophia cut power, dove sharply, and disappeared behind a ridge. The missile streaked harmlessly past, detonating miles away. Her pulse quickened, but she didn't falter. Adapt. Always adapt. The middle phase of the mission tested more than skill. It tested her willpower. Alone in hostile skies, surrounded by unseen enemies, the weight of isolation pressed down. No squad mates, no wingmen, just her and the machine. Yet within that solitude lay clarity. No distractions, no voices of doubt. Only instinct and calculation. By the 8th strike, half the network lay in ruins. Still, 4 targets remained, fortresses bristling with every weapon the enemy could muster. These final strikes would be the hardest, demanding precision beyond even her past victories. As she adjusted her course toward Target 9, She caught her reflection faintly in the glass canopy. For an instant, she saw not herself, but her grandfather, his calm eyes, his steady voice. Little aviator, sometimes one mission changes the world. She gripped the controls tighter. Her body ached. Her nerves screamed, but the fire in her chest burned brighter. She had not come this far to falter. Operation Phantom Strike was far from over, and the deadliest part still lay ahead. The night sky was no longer silent. It burned with streaks of fire as enemy defenses poured everything they had into the darkness. Sirens wailed across the bases below. Searchlights cut jagged paths through the sky, and missiles streaked upward in desperate arcs. The network was collapsing, but the enemy clung to survival with ferocity. Sophia Carter guided the B-2 Spirit through the storm with calm precision. Her eyes scanned the displays, her hands adjusting course in micro-movements. To anyone else, the chaos would have felt overwhelming. To her, it was a puzzle, each piece shifting into place as she adapted on instinct. Target 9 loomed on her map, an underground bunker fortified with steel and reinforced concrete. Conventional tactics would fail. She adjusted altitude, banking the bomber into a narrow valley. Flying low, she disappeared beneath radar, skimming the earth so closely the terrain alarm screamed. She silenced them, trusting her judgment. The release was timed to the millisecond. The bomb plunged into the heart of the bunker, vanishing into the earth before erupting in a roar that shook the ground. When the dust cleared, nothing remained but collapsed earth and burning fragments. Target 9 neutralized, she whispered, voice steady. Target 10 was worse. The base bristled with anti-aircraft guns. Every barrel pointed skyward. As she approached, the guns opened fire, filling the night with glowing streams of death. Tracers carved patterns around her, so close she could almost feel the heat. Sophia didn't hesitate. She dove into the barrage, weaving through fire with precision born of countless hours in the F-16. The bomber wasn't built for acrobatics, but she bent it to her will, coaxing maneuvers from the Spirit that most would never dare attempt. Her payload fell, detonating across the gun emplacements. Fire blossomed, silencing the defenses one by one. Within moments, the base was engulfed in smoke and flames. She exhaled, sweat beading on her forehead. 10 down. 2 to go. But the enemy was learning. With 2 targets left, they funneled every resource into stopping her. Radar grew sharper, missiles more precise. As she lined up the 11th target, alarms shrieked. A missile had locked onto her position. She pushed the bomber harder than ever before. Banking left, then right. She cut altitude and climbed again, trying to shake the lock. The missile closed in, screaming like a banshee. At the last second, she executed a violent dive, pulling the bomber into a maneuver no manual had ever taught. The missile exploded harmlessly above. The shock wave rattled the cockpit, but the aircraft held together. Sophia steadied her breathing, lined up the strike, and released. The 11th base vanished in a flash of fire. Her body trembled from the strain, but her voice remained calm. Target 11 destroyed. Now only one remained. The 12th base, the most heavily defended of all. Missiles surrounded it like a fortress wall, and every radar dish in the region pointed toward her. The enemy knew what was coming, and they were ready to die stopping it. Sophia stared at the display. This was the final test, the one her grandfather had spoken of so many times. Sometimes one mission changes the fate of nations. She whispered the words under her breath. This is that mission. The approach was brutal. Missiles launched in waves. Radar painted her position relentlessly. She flew as if possessed, every maneuver executed with impossible precision. Terrain became her shield, timing her cloak. Each second stretched into eternity as she fought her way closer. Finally, she saw the target locked in her display. Her hands didn't shake. She pressed the release. The weapon streaked downward, a silent messenger of destruction. The explosion ripped through the base, fire consuming everything. The 12th installation collapsed into ruin. The network was gone. For a moment, there was silence. The enemy defenses faltered, their coordination shattered. Sophia let herself breathe, chest heaving with exhaustion. "Control," she said into the comms, voice soft but steady. "This is Spirit 1. All 12 targets eliminated. Operation Phantom Strike complete. There was no immediate reply. Just static, the weight of disbelief stretching through the silence. Then, finally, a voice returned, thick with awe. Spirit 1 confirm. 12 targets destroyed. Mission accomplished. Sophia leaned back in her seat, eyes closing for just a moment. She had done it. Alone, against impossible odds. She had redefined what was possible. When the Spirit of Washington touched down hours later, the runway was lined with personnel. Mechanics, officers, commanders. Every eye followed the bomber as it rolled to a stop. The canopy opened, and Sophia climbed down, exhausted but unbroken. The crowd was silent at first, stunned by the magnitude of what she had achieved. Then applause erupted, a wave of sound that filled the air. General Donovan stepped forward, his face unreadable. For a long moment, he simply studied her. Then, slowly, he saluted. "You proved me wrong, Captain," he said quietly, his voice stripped of arrogance. "Tonight, you redefined strategic bombing, and you redefined what we thought possible." Sophia returned the salute. She didn't need to speak. The mission spoke for itself. 6 months later, she was promoted to major, placed in command of advanced strategic operations. Her techniques became doctrine, reshaping the way the Air Force trained pilots. Donovan himself became one of her strongest supporters, often telling young officers, "Never underestimate innovation. Experience matters, but sometimes it blinds us to possibility." Sophia Carter continued to fly, but her greatest legacy was not in missions alone. It was in teaching others that courage and creativity could achieve what tradition never dared. She told her students the same lesson her grandfather had given her. The world will tell you that you lack experience. Let your results prove otherwise. Years later, when people spoke of Operation Phantom Strike, they remembered it not just as a mission. They remembered it as the night one pilot shattered the barriers of doubt. The night innovation triumphed over tradition. The night a young captain named Sophia Carter proved that the future belonged to those willing to think differently.